Welcome to Dark Feed, where once you find the feed, it finds you. They say evil has a face, but what if it's smiling? What if it opens your door, holds your books, and makes you feel seen, only to tear you apart when no one's watching? That was Ted Bundy. He wasn't a monster hiding in the dark. He was the stranger who made you feel safe. And that's what made him deadly. His victims were young women, smart, ambitious, full of life. And all he had to do was smile, ask for help, or wear a fake cast, and they'd follow him right to their deaths. Because he looked normal, because he seemed charming. But inside that face was a void, cold, hungry, calculating, and it would take years, multiple escapes, and over 30 bodies before anyone truly understood what they were dealing with. This is the story of Ted Bundy, and it begins in the most ordinary way possible. The beginning. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But his life started with a lie. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was unmarried. So to avoid the shame, she passed off Ted as her younger brother, and he was raised believing his grandparents were his parents. Ted wouldn't learn the truth until years later. And when he did, something in him changed. He grew cold, detached, resentful. People who knew him as a child said he was quiet, polite, even charming. But there were cracks in the mask. He tortured animals. He peeped into neighbors' windows. And he started developing a deep, twisted fascination with violence, especially against women. Still, he kept up appearances. He was clean-cut, well-spoken, and painfully aware of how he came across. The perfect mask. Bundy enrolled at the University of Washington, studying psychology. He was articulate, charismatic. He even worked at a suicide hotline where coworkers remembered him as kind, thoughtful, a guy who really listened. But in the background, he was learning how people think. What they trust, what they fear, what they don't notice. And he began to fantasize about what it would take to make someone vanish. Not in a flash, not in anger, but slowly, methodically. He wanted to control it all. His first known victim was Linda and Healy, a 21-year-old University of Washington student. On February 1, 1974, she vanished from her basement bedroom. The bed was made, the room tidy, but there was blood on the pillow, a nightgown missing, and her bike was still in the room untouched. There were no screams, no struggle, just silence, and then nothing. It wouldn't be the last time. The disappearances begin. In the spring and summer of 1974, young women began vanishing across the Pacific Northwest. Donna Manson, 19, disappeared while heading to a concert. Susan Rancourt, 18, gone after a college meeting. Roberta Parks, 20, left her dorm to get coffee. Never came back. Brenda Ball, Georgian Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, all vanished without a trace. Most were brunettes, young, and wearing middle-parted hair. They weren't runaways. They weren't careless. They were picked, chosen. And Bundy had a method. He'd fake an injury, a cast, a limp, sometimes carrying books or asking for help with his car. He'd play vulnerable. And women, seeing a polite, injured man in need, would lower their guard. Then he'd bring them to his Volkswagen Beetle, modified to lock from the inside, with the passenger seat removed. Once they were inside, they were already dead. Lake Sammamish. On July 14, 1974, Bundy made a mistake. He got bold. That day, thousands of people were gathered at Lake Sammamish State Park in Washington. Bundy approached multiple women in broad daylight, wearing a sling and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. Some said no. 2 said yes. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. Both vanished. Witnesses remembered the man introducing himself as Ted. That name, combined with a sketch and a description of the tan VW Beetle, was finally enough for police to start connecting the dots. But Bundy had already moved on. crossing state lines. After the Lake Sammamish disappearances, Bundy left Washington and headed to Utah, enrolling in law school. But he didn't stop killing. In October 1974, Melissa Smith, the daughter of a police chief, went missing. Her body was found weeks later. Soon after, Laura M., 17, missing. Debbie Kent, 17, disappeared from a school parking lot, all beaten, raped, strangled, sometimes decapitated, and still no arrest. Bundy was moving fast, charming people, changing cars, switching locations. By the time police started closing in on the suspect in Utah, Bundy was already active in Colorado. And in early 1975, they got lucky. The first arrest. On August 16, 1975, Bundy was pulled over by police in Granger, Utah, for driving erratically. Inside the car, they found a ski mask, handcuffs, rope, an ice pick, trash bags, a crowbar. Bundy said they were tools for his car. But police weren't buying it. He was arrested, initially on suspicion of burglary. Soon, they began to tie him to the missing women. Bundy was charged with attempted kidnapping of a young woman who had narrowly escaped his grip months earlier. He was found guilty, sent to jail in Utah, and extradited to Colorado to face charges in the murder of Karen Campbell, a nurse who disappeared from a hotel hallway. It looked like the story was finally over. But Bundy wasn't finished. Escape number 1. In June 1977, while being held at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Bundy asked to use the law library to prepare his defense. They left him alone. He jumped from a second-story window and ran. For 6 days, he evaded capture by hiding in the mountains, stealing food and clothes. He was recaptured and placed in a more secure cell. But he was already planning his next move. Escape number 2. On December 30th, 1977, Bundy sawed a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell and crawled into a maintenance space. He'd lost weight deliberately to fit through the gap. Then he slipped into a guard's uniform and walked out the front door. He stole a car and fled to Florida. There, Bundy would commit his most brutal murders yet. The mass cracks. By this point, the media had dubbed him the campus killer, but the world still didn't fully grasp what he was. Handsome, polite, educated. It didn't fit the picture of a killer. That was the terror, because the real horror wasn't the blood or the death. It was how easy it was to trust him. In Florida, Bundy's killing spree would explode into something even darker. He wasn't just murdering now. He was unleashing everything. The rage, the fantasies, the full monster behind the smile. But that's for part 2, because the road he takes next is the Shadow Road, and it's paved with blood. He was supposed to be locked away, caged, done. But Ted Bundy was never really trapped. Not by the bars, not by the law, and certainly not by the people who thought they knew who he really was. Because monsters like Bundy don't just break free, they evolve. And when he slipped out of that jail cell in Colorado, he didn't just run. He hunted. And what came next was so brutal, so reckless, that it felt less like murder and more like a declaration. A final message before the world finally saw him for what he really was. Florida. After his escape in late December 1977, Ted Bundy made his way to Tallahassee, Florida. He used fake IDs, stole cars, slept in abandoned apartments. He was a fugitive, but he wasn't hiding. He was waiting, and 5 weeks after his escape, he struck again, the Chi Omega House. It was January 15th, 1978. The Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University was quiet. Most of the girls were asleep, dreaming, safe. At least, they thought they were. At around 2:45 a.m., Bundy broke in through a back door with a broken lock, and what followed was 7 minutes of carnage. He moved from room to room, silent, calculated. He bludgeoned Margaret Bowman, 21, with a piece of oak firewood and strangled her with a nylon stocking. He then beat and sexually assaulted Lisa Levy, 20, before biting a chunk out of her left buttock, leaving behind a deep bite mark. He strangled her, too. In the next room, he brutally beat Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, who miraculously survived, despite devastating injuries. Bundy walked out calmly. No one heard him leave, but he wasn't finished. Just a few blocks away, he broke into the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, a dance student. He attacked her in her sleep. When she awoke hours later in a pool of her own blood, her jaw was broken, and her skull fractured in 5 places. She lived, but she would never dance again. It was no longer about control. No more fake casts. No more luring women into his car. This was rage. Unfiltered. Explosive. Bundy was unraveling, but he was also leaving clues. The hunt begins again. For the first time, police had surviving victims. Women who had seen his face, heard his voice, felt his violence. And then there was the bite mark. It would later become key forensic evidence. One of the few times dental impressions were used to match a killer to a victim. But Bundy didn't wait for the heat. He ran. Again. Kimberly Leach. On February 9, 1978, Bundy abducted Kimberly Leach, a 12-year-old girl from Lake City, Florida. It was broad daylight. She was walking between buildings at her junior high school. Bundy lured her to his stolen van. No one saw it happen. Her body was found weeks later, hidden in a pig shed. She had been sexually assaulted, murdered, and discarded like garbage. It was the most vile, desperate act of his spree, and it would be his last. The arrest. Just days after Kimberly's murder, Bundy was pulled over by a Pensacola police officer for driving a stolen vehicle. He fought, tried to run, and for the first time he lost. Inside the car, stolen credit cards, IDs, wigs, and the name Chris Hagen, another fake alias. At first, he refused to give his real name, but within days they knew. They had Ted Bundy, the trial of the century. What followed was a spectacle unlike anything seen in American legal history. Bundy was charged with the Chi Omega murders, the attack on Cheryl Thomas, and the murder of Kimberly Leach. He refused counsel, choosing to represent himself. He cross-examined his own victims, smirked during testimony, flirted with reporters. He treated the courtroom like a stage. But beneath the charm, he was losing control. The evidence mounted. Bundy's bite mark matched the wound on Lisa Levy. Survivors identified him. His stolen IDs and vehicle linked him to the crimes. The jury didn't take long. The sentencing. In July 1979, Ted Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders. He was sentenced to death. In 1980, he was convicted again, this time for the murder of Kimberly Leach. Another death sentence. Now he waited on Florida's death row, playing the same game. Appealing, denying, stalling. But the clock was ticking. The women who loved him, even as his crimes shocked the nation, Bundy received love letters in prison. Women showed up to his trials. One even married him while he was on the stand. Her name was Carol Ann Boone, and she believed he was innocent. She later gave birth to a daughter, fathered during one of their visits. It was a disturbing testament to Bundy's enduring charm. Even behind bars, he manipulated. Even facing death, he smiled. The confessions. As the 1980s ended, Bundy ran out of options. His execution was scheduled for January 24, 1989. In the final weeks, he began to talk, confessing to 30 murders, possibly more. He described in chilling detail how he killed, raped, and dismembered young women. He admitted to keeping souvenirs, sometimes heads, sometimes clothing. He revisited their bodies, engaged in necrophilia, dumped them in remote woods, then went back. He said he didn't feel guilt, only loss of control. He even tried to blame pornography, said it poisoned his mind. But no one believed him. This wasn't about porn or a troubled childhood. or being misunderstood. This was about power, domination, and a hunger that never stopped growing. The execution. At 7:06 a.m. on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was electrocuted at Florida State Prison. Crowds gathered outside the prison gates, chanting, "Burn, Bundy, burn." And inside, a monster was finally silenced. But the damage? Permanent. Dozens of families never got closure. Some bodies were never found. And even now, the exact number of victims remains unknown. He took that with him, just like the smile, what he left behind. Bundy changed everything. He forced America to see that killers aren't always monstrous on the outside. Sometimes, they're handsome, well-spoken, friendly. Sometimes, they're the stranger who walks you to your car, the guy at the bookstore, the man you let hold your groceries while you unlock the door. He weaponized normalcy, and the most terrifying part is, he almost got away with all of it. Ted Bundy is dead, burned out in the electric chair as crowds cheered from outside the prison walls. But the terror he brought, it didn't die with him. It lingers, in dorm rooms, in forests, in the silence between headlines. Because Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a lesson we still haven't learned. A reminder that evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it holds a law degree. Sometimes it's the stranger who knows just what to say. And even now, decades later, the world still flinches when they hear his name. The numbers game. Before his execution, Bundy confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. But those were just the ones he chose to admit. Investigators believe the true number could be closer to 100. Some think more. He started in Washington, moved through Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Florida. He killed everywhere he went, and he was so careful. So good at erasing evidence, changing methods, switching cars, crossing state lines, that dozens of cases remain unsolved, unlabeled, and forever cold. If not for one traffic stop in Utah, he might have disappeared forever. The missing. Not all of Bundy's victims were found. Some are still out there, buried in shallow graves, lost to forest undergrowth and time. Their names aren't in the confession list. They don't have memorials. They're just gone. And that's how Bundy wanted it. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to erase. To make people vanish in a way that said, "You never mattered." That was the cruelty behind it all. The deeper horror. The violence was only part of the story. The real damage was what he took away. Identities, futures, names, souvenirs of death. Bundy was a collector. He kept earrings, ID cards, shoes, photos, but his most disturbing keepsakes were the bodies themselves. He would return to the dumping grounds, revisit the corpses, dress them, apply makeup, engage in necrophilic acts sometimes days or weeks after death. He wanted to own them, even in death, even in decay. He didn't see victims. He saw props in his personal fantasy. And when they rotted too far, he'd burn them, bury them, replace them, then find another. What made him? There's no easy answer. Bundy blamed pornography, abandonment, and mental illness. But none of it adds up. Millions of people experience trauma. They don't kill. Millions watch violent movies. They don't decapitate strangers in the woods. The truth is, Bundy wasn't broken. He was empty, emotionally vacant, void of empathy, obsessed with control. He didn't snap. He planned. For years, and he enjoyed every second of it. The psychology of a predator. Psychologists later labeled Bundy as a narcissist, a sociopath, and a sexual sadist. He scored nearly off the charts on the hair psychopathy checklist. But none of those labels explain how he went so long without getting caught. Because he wasn't just sick, he was strategic. He read crime novels, watched how detectives worked, took criminal justice courses, volunteered at political campaigns, memorized police habits. Bundy didn't avoid the system. He studied it, and he used it. Every smile, every lie, every courtroom trick, it was all part of the performance. The trials were theater. Bundy's trials weren't just legal proceedings. They were shows. He represented himself, cross-examined his own witnesses, married a woman in court, gave interviews from death row. He wanted to be seen. He wanted people to doubt, to admire, to fear. He wore the mask until the very end. But behind it, he was unraveling. The final hours. In the final days before his execution, Bundy began to crack. He wept, begged, gave last-minute confessions, offered to show where bodies were buried if only they'd spare his life. He even spoke to Dr. James Dobson, a Christian psychologist, hoping for sympathy. He talked about his addiction to pornography, said he didn't want to hurt people, that he'd been influenced by dark forces. But by then, no one was listening. The families didn't care. The prosecutors didn't care. The public didn't care. They just wanted him gone. The execution. At 7:06 a.m. on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was strapped into Florida's electric chair. Witnesses say he looked terrified. Not smug, not defiant, just afraid. A white cloth was placed over his face. The switch was thrown. Smoke rose from his head. The room filled with the scent of burning flesh. Outside the prison gates, over 200 people gathered. Some wore shirts that said, "Fry Bundy." Others cheered and set off fireworks. It was the end, but not the closure. Because how do you close the book on a man who left so many chapters unwritten? The legacy. Bundy changed how America saw killers. Before him, we pictured monsters, shadows in alleys, growling lunatics, knife-wielding madmen. After him, we looked differently, at the guy holding the door open, the man with the good job, the one with the charming laugh. Bundy was the perfect predator, not because he was stronger, but because he was invisible. He didn't look like a threat, and that made him lethal. The culture of fear. Bundy's crimes created new fears. Hitchhiking plummeted. Self-defense classes skyrocketed. Campus security policies changed nationwide. Women were warned to never walk alone. People started looking twice at every friendly face. He created a psychological shift in American trust. He turned charisma into a weapon. And we've never looked at strangers the same way since. The ones who survived. Bundy didn't get them all. Some women escaped. Some fought back. Some ran. They lived, but they carried the scars forever. One survivor, Kathy Kleiner, who barely survived the Chi Omega attack, later said, "He didn't win. I lived. He didn't break me." Others, like Carol Durant, whose testimony helped convict him, spent decades looking over their shoulder. Even in prison, Bundy had a strange gravitational pull, and survivors knew he wouldn't stop until someone stopped him. The modern obsession. Even now, Bundy is a fixture in pop culture. Documentaries, Netflix specials, books, biopics. Some paint him as a monster. Others flirt with fascination. But the truth is simple. He was a man who chose evil, repeatedly, without remorse. There is no romance in that, only death.